I'm Nadra Tawab, and this week I will be talking about reasons people go to therapy. So last week I posted two things about reasons that people go to therapy, and I listed a ton of things like to be seen, to be heard, to talk about the people in their lives that won't go to therapy. So I won't go into all of those points, but I do want to say that the number one reason is to be seen and to be heard. I think many times we think that people are going to therapy because they're crazy, they're in crisis, something really bad is happening. But I would say for the majority of people that I see, they are going to therapy because they want to vent, they want to process, they want understanding, they want to uncover more about themselves. So those are huge reasons to go to therapy. And also that support piece is really important. So as we're thinking about going to therapy, and I know it's still a huge stigma in the community about why people go to therapy and the idea of being depressed or being anxious. But let me tell you something. Everybody is anxious. We label that in all different sorts of ways. We may label that anxiety as, not being able to sleep, having racing thoughts, being, uneasy, all of these sorts of things. We may say, I feel this instead of saying I feel anxious. So those are just things that we sort of normalize and talk about in therapy as being normal and part of the human experience. So therapy is not crisis-based. It's not for people who have severe mental health issues. It can be for people who just want to talk about relationships or who want help with work-life balance. And that is a huge population of people going to therapy. So as we think about therapy as a process, it's always important for me to normalize therapy and to talk about it in a way that's very normal. To not just my clients, but to other people who are not so familiar with the process, and to label things that we consider mental health issues like depression and anxiety as very normal experiences, because that contributes to the stigma of people coming to therapy. So this week's question was about what should I expect in my first session. So I cannot speak for every therapist, but I will say when I have that initial appointment with someone, that first session is really for me to get an understanding of the person in front of me. So I'm asking questions about your childhood, questions about how you function now, your coping skills, your family, what you like to do for fun, your substance abuse, if you abuse any substances, all of that sort of stuff, so I could get a clear indication of who you are and how we can work together. It's not necessarily like me asking, so how was your childhood? It flows in a very conversational manner, because people, once you say something like, tell me why you're here, they start to open up and talk about things that kind of triggers me to say, okay, so I heard you say something about your mom. Tell me more about your relationship with your mom. And that just naturally flows into, whatever childhood stuff. So it's not like very robotic. It's a very natural conversation. And I do know that many people are anxious, especially at the beginning of the first session and even leading up to that first session, because they don't know what to expect. So in that first session, just expect to tell the story of who you are and to answer any questions that you may have about or to ask any questions you may have about the therapy process. So in the beginning, I talk for about 1 to 2 minutes about, just what the therapy process is, what people think it is. I say something like, most people think therapy is like Dr. Phil. You go in and you say, hey, these are my problems. And this person says, okay, here are all the answers. And that's not true. But it's really a process for you to have a space to be open, to be heard, to be seen. And I talk a little bit about my approach, and then, the statement we have to make around, if you're harming yourself, if you know of a child being harmed, or if you intend to hurt someone, we have to, break confidentiality and take action on that. And then after that part, the person is able to talk about, whatever they want for about 45 minutes or so. And then at the end, I just give feedback on what I heard, and I kind of, make sure I have a clear understanding of all the things that were said to me, and we make a plan for what they want this process to look like. So that is what a first session with me looks like. And I'm pretty sure with other therapists, they have very similar processes where they are trying to get to know who you are and how you can work together. I would say give it a few sessions. If you feel really nervous after the first time, it will start to feel better, but it's still a very new process. So you have to give yourself time to get acquainted. If you feel as nervous in session 10 as you felt in session 1 and you don't think it's the therapist, I think you should certainly talk to the therapist about that. I can notice when people are very uncomfortable, and I will name that. I will say, are you feeling anxious? And most of the time they'll say, yes, I am. How do you know? And I'm like, oh, your leg is shaking, or you keep moving your hand in a certain way, those sorts of things. And at the end of our time together, I will say, well, how do you feel now? Do you feel as anxious as when you came in? And I explained to them that this is a part of the process. Sometimes you do feel nervous. That is just your body's way of saying we are doing something different. We are doing something new. So I try not to ignore that and to try to name it and really help people start to get the idea that a lot of these feelings that we feel are very normal. So I normalize it even in the space, even in our first session. So if you don't have a therapist yet, or if you are considering therapy, some really good places to start is Google. You could just say therapist in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a page of resources will come up. Or if you have a particular issue, you could say therapy for anxiety in Charlotte, North Carolina, or wherever you are, and a list of folks will come up. I think that's one of the best ways to find a therapist. I often get requests on Instagram where people will say, hey, I live in San Diego. Can you help me find a therapist? And typically I cannot, because the folks that I do know that live in these other states, they are booked and busy. So if you're looking for someone in your particular city or state, it's not a bad idea just to hit Google. As you're looking through folks, make sure you're reading their websites, their bios, how, their treatment approach, because you want to make sure that this person is a good fit for you, and not that, they just live in your neighborhood. So making sure they're a good fit. Another way to find a therapist is if you're using insurance, through your insurance company. If you feel that you cannot afford therapy, local colleges and universities usually have a counseling center, and some of those counseling centers will offer free or low-cost therapy. Also, private and group practices typically have interns, and they will offer free and low-cost therapy. If you are connected to a church, some churches will either pay for you to go to therapy, or they have therapists on staff. If you are on Medicaid, there is a very low cost for you to receive therapy as well. And I'm saying that because I get a lot of, I can't afford a therapist, so what do I do? So I just want to provide some resources if you're unable to afford a therapist, that you can try these other things. And then also you can ask, you can call any therapist's office and just see if they would be willing to accept a sliding scale or a reduced fee. So I hope that helps with understanding the therapy process more and why people go to therapy, and then finding a therapist and getting through that first appointment. Thank you.